Our lesson today is from John chapter 6, continuing on in the Gospel of John. And we see here, chapter 6, verse 1, this little phrase. It says, "After these things." Now this phrase is a particular word. In Greek, the phrase is metataua. In English, it's translated "after these things." And you see this word, metataua, in John's writing, John, the disciples' writing. And you see this show up in the book of Revelation. This word metataua appears multiple times in the book of Revelation, and it separates the sections in Revelation. And now here in the Gospel of John, this word also appears. And John uses this word to separate the different sections of his Gospel. And we see this pattern in the Gospel of John, where there's a miracle, or as John calls him, there's a sign. Jesus gives a sign, and then Jesus gives a discourse, or a sermon, about the sign. We saw that with the woman at the well, the one woman of Samaria at the well. Jesus had this interaction with her. He told her that she didn't have one husband, she had 5 husbands. And then he gave this living water discourse, that he was the living water. We saw another discourse at the pool of Bethesda. He healed a man who had been lame for 38 years. Told the man, "Arise, take up thy bed and walk." The man did as Jesus said. And then you see this discourse as Jesus discourses with the teachers and the Pharisees over walking and working on the Sabbath, and Jesus coming to do the will of the Father. And now here we are in chapter 6, John chapter 6. And this is the bread of life discourse, where Jesus is going to feed the multitude, and then following the feeding of the multitude, he explains that, he unpacks that for us. And this is unique to the Gospel of John. This is a pattern that you don't find in the Synoptic Gospels. The Synoptic Gospels is more of a running narrative of the action events. Jesus had this action, he told these parables, he moved here and went there and so on. But in the Gospel of John, you find these longer discourses where John records the discourses. The words of Jesus are recorded for us here to learn, to look, listen, and learn from. So here we are, chapter 6, verse 1. "After these things, Jesus went over the Sea of Galilee," which is the Sea of Tiberias. "And a great multitude followed him, because they saw his miracles which he did on them that were diseased. And Jesus," verse 3, "went up into a mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. And the Passover, a feast of the Jews, was nigh." So it was springtime. It was a springtime in the land of Israel. Jesus is around the Sea of Galilee, which John tells us is also called the Sea of Tiberias. And these people were following him. The people were following him because they saw him doing these wonderful miracles. And we're going to see how this crowd and this thing interacts with Jesus as we go along. So the springtime, verse 5, "When Jesus lifted up his eyes and saw a great company come unto him, he said unto Philip, Whence shall we buy bread that these may eat?" Verse 6, "And this he said to prove him, for he himself knew what he would do." So you have a great multitude of people. It says in verse 10 that there was 5,000 people. They were a long way, maybe 7 or 8 miles, possibly 10 miles by land, I don't know, from the city. in the wilderness. The people were hungry. And Jesus asks Philip, how are we going to feed these people? It's time for lunch. It's time for, or an evening meal. It was time to eat. And it says that Jesus asked Philip to prove him, to test him. Jesus was testing Philip. Jesus was testing his disciple. He was asking his disciple, what are we going to do? We've got a situation on our hands. And you know, it's a suspect that Jesus chose Philip to ask this question because Philip had been thinking about this. You see yourself here in verse 7 that Philip had a ready answer. Philip knew that 200 pennyworth of bread, that's about 7 months' wages, would not be enough for them, that every one of them may take a bite. For this crowd, 7 months' wages wouldn't be enough to feed this crowd. Is Jesus testing you today? Are you looking at an impossible situation? You don't know where the answer is going to come from? Trust God. Trust Jesus. Jesus has a situation in hand. Philip didn't know the answer. Philip had a worldly answer. So, well, if we had 7 months worth of wages, we might be able to get enough food here, and every person could get a little bitty bite. That's not Jesus' answer. Jesus didn't take that answer. Let's continue on in verse 8. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said unto him, there is a lad here which has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fishes. But what are they among so many? So Andrew had doubts in the face of this situation. But he was a little closer to the mark than Philip was. He brought the lad's lunch. He brought the lad's lunch. And he put this into the hands of Jesus. So that's what we want to do. Whatever you have, no matter how small and insignificant it seems, compared to the size problem you're facing, put it in Jesus' hand. All your resources, however meager, he can turn them to account. Here we see in verse 10, Jesus says, make the men sit down. There was much grass in that place, so the men sat down, in number about 5,000. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed to his disciples, and the disciples to them that were set down, and likewise of the fishes. Look at this. As much as they would. As much as they would. Verse 12. And when they were filled, Jesus said unto his disciples, gather up the fragments that remain, that nothing be lost. So Jesus took these 5 barley cakes, 2 little fish about the size of a sardine, He gave it to his disciples and said, distribute this among the people. And as the people took, the miracle happened. The miracle happened in the working of the thing, and everybody was satisfied. They ate until they were satisfied. Jesus satisfied their hunger, satisfied their need for bread, knew that they needed to have something to eat. They had been out a long time. The barley cake is the most humble of foods for the poor people. The barley cake and the fish is the poor people ate that. And Jesus took that humble meal and fed the multitude. Praise God. And didn't just feed them, satisfied them. The multitude was satisfied. Gather up the fragments, that nothing be lost or wasted. We don't want to take the Lord's provision lightly. We don't want to presume upon it. We don't want to waste it. The Lord gives us these gifts to use and to be good stewards. Good stewards of these gifts. Verse 13, therefore they gathered them together. They gathered up the fragments and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves which remained over above them that had eaten. So this 12 is significant. We're going to come back to this verse in a little while. I'm going to continue on here. Verse 14. And those men, when they had seen the miracle that Jesus did, said, this is of a truth, that a prophet that should come, that this is the prophet that should come into the world. So they recognized that Jesus was a prophet after he fed them, yes. Verse 15, Jesus therefore perceived that they would come and take him by force to make him king. He departed again into a mountain himself alone. And when evening was come, his disciples went down into the sea and entered into a ship and went over the sea towards Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus was not come to them. Verse 18, and the sea arose by reason of a great wind that blew. Uh-oh. No sooner do we get finished with one situation, then another situation overtakes us, overtakes the disciples. They had just finished watching Jesus feed the 5,000. They go down to a boat. Now this Sea of Capernaum, there's something about the atmospheric conditions and the fronts. I don't understand all the behind it, but this sea gets particularly violent storms come across this Sea of Galilee on a regular basis. And the waves whip across the water. It's a pretty big lake. You can't see across it. They whip across the water, and the waves get 15 feet high, good-sized waves come across the water. So it was night. The disciples were on a boat in the middle of the sea. The waves were whipping around. And in verse 19, so when they had rowed about 25 or 30 furlongs, it's about 3 or 4 miles, they see Jesus walking on the sea, drawing nigh unto the ship, and they were afraid. Afraid. After they had just witnessed this wonderful miracle, they were still subject to the fears of the world and things that go on. They hadn't learned to trust Jesus yet, to lean upon him, to depend upon him. They saw the waves, they saw Jesus walking on the water, and they were afraid. Verse 20, and Jesus said unto them, It is I, be not afraid. How tenderly Jesus treated him. He didn't rebuke them for being afraid. He had just witnessed one wonderful miracle. Now here he's walking on the water, another miracle. And Jesus is so tender with these disciples. He's so gentle with them to help them understand, to learn who their master was. Kind and gentle. They did learn the lesson. They did learn the lesson. And it wasn't here. But over the years that they spent with Jesus, they learned to trust him. Verse 21, then they willingly received him into the ship. And immediately the ship was at the land whither they went. So Jesus got in the boat. That's where we want Jesus in our boat. And when Jesus is there, the journey is short. Jesus got in the boat and they were at the land. Verse 22, the day following, when the people which stood on the other side of the sea saw that there was none other boat there save the one whereunto his disciples had entered, and that Jesus went not with his disciples into the boat, but that his disciples were also gone away alone. This is a little bit awkward construction in the King James. Howbeit there came other boats from Tiberias nigh unto the place where they did eat bread, after that the Lord had given thanks. So what's happening here is the people had spent the night on the mountain. They had been spent the night on the mountain. New day is here. People are looking. Where's Jesus? Where did Jesus go? We know he didn't get into the boat with his disciples. But we don't see him here either. We don't know where he went. So they are puzzled about this. So they saw that Jesus wasn't on the mountain. He wasn't on the greensward where they had reclined for lunch the day before. So word had gotten around the lake that Jesus was giving away bread, free bread. So the people from this town of Tiberias sailed across the lake overnight to find Jesus. And when they saw he wasn't there, they all got into the boats. The 5,000 of them who could fit, or some I'm sure probably walked back to Capernaum. It was within walking distance. So they went back to Capernaum. Verse 24, when the people saw that Jesus was not there, neither his disciples, they took shipping and came to Capernaum seeking for Jesus. They came back to the city looking for Jesus. Verse 25, and when they found him on the other side of the sea, they said unto him, Rabbi, whence camest thou hither? They didn't know how Jesus got there. They were confused. They were trying to figure out how you were here, now you're over here. The people were confused by this. They didn't understand what had happened with the disciples, that Jesus walked in the boat. And notice that Jesus doesn't really answer that question when they ask him, whence camest thou hither? Jesus goes in a different direction, verse 26. Jesus answered them and said, Verily, verily, I say unto you, that ye seek me, not because you saw the miracles, but because ye did eat of the loaves and were filled. The people were looking for Jesus because they wanted bread. They wanted the food. Makes perfect sense. perfect sense. Jesus is not a sugar daddy. Jesus did not come to make your life comfortable and tidy. Jesus came to be worshiped. Jesus came to be the object of your affection. Not to make you happy, but to give you joy. Not to fill your cup with bread, but to be the object of your affections. Verse 27. Labor not for meat which perisheth, but for that meat which endureth unto everlasting life, which the Son of Man shall give unto you. For him hath God the Father sealed. Now, Jesus is very clear here. It's kind of a paradox. Labor not for the meat which perisheth. How many people are laboring to put up money for their retirement? To put up money for a life of ease? To put up money to satisfy themselves, their desires? Jesus says don't do that. He says don't labor for those things. But instead, second half of verse 27, labor for that meat which endureth unto everlasting life. Labor for that meat. Labor for that meat. And now here's the paradox. We're going to labor for it. And the Son of Man shall give unto you. So how do we labor for it when it's a gift? It's confusing. We're to labor for the meat of everlasting life, which the Son of Man shall give unto you. The Son of Man is going to give you this, but you're to labor for it. That's confusing. Look at verse 28. Then said the people unto him, what shall we do that we might work the works of God? So the people were confused. The people didn't understand what Jesus was saying, and they asked him, what do you mean? What do you mean here? What is this labor for meat that I shall give you? What does that mean? John gives us the answer. Verse 29. Jesus answers that question. So Jesus answered and said unto them, this is the work of God, that ye believe on him whom he hath sent. There. That's how we labor. We labor by believing. Believe. Believe. Hear and believe. Hallelujah. They said therefore unto him, what sign showest thou then, that we may see and believe? What dost thou work? Our fathers did eat manna in the desert, as is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. Verse 32, Jesus says, verily, verily, I say unto you, Moses gave you not that bread from heaven, but my Father giveth you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he which cometh down from heaven, and giveth light unto the world. The bread of God is he which cometh down and gives light unto the world. That's the bread of God. It wasn't the bread that Moses sent, wasn't the bread of life. Then they said unto him, Lord, evermore give us this bread. Just like the woman at the well. The woman at the well, when Jesus said that he is the living water, or when Jesus said it's the water that will satisfy her, she said, give me this water. And here the people are saying, give us this bread. Give us this bread from heaven, the bread of everlasting life. Verse 35, and Jesus said unto them, I am the bread of life. He that cometh to me shall never hunger, and he that believeth on me shall never thirst. So Jesus is the bread of life. But I say unto you, that ye also have seen me, and believe not. Wow. Whew, that's a sobering word. That they saw Jesus, but they did not believe. Verse 36. They saw Jesus, but did not believe. So Jesus instructed them to labor, to believe. And Jesus tells them that they saw the miracles, but they did not believe. And then comes this verse 37. All that the Father giveth to me shall come to me, and him that cometh to me I will in no wise cast out. For I came down from heaven not to do mine own will, but the will of him that sent me. Wow, what a comforting verse. So right next to the verse where Jesus says that you don't believe, sandwiched right up against that verse, is Jesus saying that the Father has given him to come to me. Thank goodness that God doesn't leave it up to us. The Father gave to Jesus, and all that the Father giveth shall come to me. Verse 37. All that the Father giveth me shall come to me. We're instructed to believe. Jesus says we don't believe. But then Jesus says that those that the Father has given him shall come to him, and he will in no wise cast out. Brothers and sisters, our salvation is of God. It's God that works in us. We were rebellious against God. We were running away from God. And God chose us. Rebels, sinners, rebellious. And he drew us by his mercy. It's an act of his mercy. He drew us when we did not have any belief. God drew us to himself. That is a wonderful comfort. That is the love of God. And we do not want this truth that God draws us. This truth does not cancel out. It does not overshadow the truth. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Two truths that stand side by side. Whoever comes and believes, and God draws you. Heaven is a big place. It's a big place. 1,200 miles square. Stretches into the sky. 1,200 miles. John said he saw the holy city of New Jerusalem coming down out of heaven like a bride prepared for the bridegroom. 1,200 mile square cube. Streets made of gold like glass. God intends to fill that place up. Fill that up. Hallelujah. God be praised.